Tag TV and Tag Radio. Be seen and heard by both technology users and technology producers throughout the state of Georgia and around the world. Low cost, big benefits, powerhouse online branded video and audio has arrived. Tag TV, Tag Radio, there's a lot more to know. The 152nd General Assembly of Georgia has convened at the Georgia State Capitol in Atlanta. As you know, the General Assembly is the state's legislature and is made up of 236 members who serve 2-year terms and are directly elected by constituents of their districts. 180 in the House of Representatives and 56 in the Senate. They all face re-election in 2014, and with all of the issues that are swirling at this assembly, what can Georgia expect of the 2014 session? Well, one thing for sure, it could finish as the earliest of any legislative session in contemporary Georgia political history. Greetings, everyone. It's Tuesday, January 21st, 2014, and this is Tech Talk with Technology Association of Georgia President Tino Mantella. Up to the Tech Talk, what's up at the 152nd session of the General Assembly as we speak with Loretta Lepore, the founder and president of Lepore Associates, a strategic communications firm based in Atlanta. Loretta's career spans more than 20 years as a journalist, CNN anchor, gubernatorial spokeswoman, and a communications coach. She started Lepore Associates after working in the government affairs office of the Atlanta-based law firm McKenna, Long & Aldridge. In that capacity, she provided crisis and issues management, counsel, and support for the firm's lawyers, professionals, and clients with media relations expertise. Loretta also has government experience, having served as the press secretary to Georgia Governor Sonny Perdue, as well as the director of marketing and communications with the Georgia Department of Economic Development. Her most notable achievements while working with the governor was serving as the state's chief communications liaison with the White House for planning the G8 Sea Island Summit. Loretta spent 11 years in CNN covering politics and international affairs. She anchored CNN headline news for 6 years, and she earned a National News Emmy for her role on CNN for the coverage of the '96 Olympic Park bombing. Just what are some of the big issues that will be under discussion under the Gold Dome this session? What were the policy initiatives that got Georgia the status of the #1 state to do business? And wait a minute, just where are we with that last session's HB 318 Invest in Georgia bill? The Tech Talk goes to the state's capital for insights into the 2014 legislative session as Tino speaks with TAG Government Relations Chairman and the president and founder of Lepore Associates, Loretta Lepore. This edition of Tech Talk is brought to you by GlobalSpeak.com, new media consultants, corporate video and audio communications, video and audio production and distribution, live and virtual event production. Tag TV and Tag Radio is a service of GlobalSpeak.com, creatively delivering powerful marketing, video, and audio solutions.
Loretta, thank you for joining me on Tech Talk today.
Thank you for having me.
So it's another year, and things have kicked off down at the Capitol, and what better person to talk to than TAG's Government Relations Chair for our task force, and wanted to get your sense as to what kind of big issues are going to be happening under the dome this year.
Well, really the focus this year is all on the budget, and primarily that has to do a lot with the election cycle, candidly. The legislature last week actually passed a bill that would move up the primary election to May 20th, and that is the earliest election we've ever had in Georgia. And because of that, the session will be quite condensed, so legislators are looking to get out of town by the middle of March. And their one constitutional obligation is to pass a balanced budget. So the session has been front-ended very heavily with budget and appropriations hearings and so forth. They want to get the 2014 amended budget out of the way right away, and they even thought that maybe this week they might be passing that, which would be unheard of. And then they'll move on to the fiscal 2015 budget, which for the first time in years is seeing some growth and some additional appropriations to education, which is being very well received. And so the budget for 2015 now is at $20 billion, and that's quite good compared to where it's been in the post-recession years.
So it's up about $1 million.
Roughly, it's
yeah.
up about $1 million. The biggest area that the governor's really focused on in his budget and increasing funds is in education, as I mentioned. And I think what most policymakers and legislators are hoping is that those funds will be used to restore the 180 days of class, and that school systems will reduce furlough days, and in turn teachers will get a salary increase, which they haven't had in a number of years. In fact, state employees have not had a salary increase in a number of years, even a minor one. So that is one thing that I think would be a positive, and that what legislators think would be a positive coming out of this budget cycle. The interesting thing is the governor did not directly say that the money, which is about $457 million, the total education budget is $8 billion, so that's a pretty sizable chunk of the overall budget, $20 billion. I know that's a lot of numbers, but needless to say, education is a big number within our overall budget. But he did give the money to the school systems, and he is allowing them to determine how those monies get allocated.
So it's up $1 billion, $19 billion to $20 billion, and they're talking about maybe a 2 to 3% increase for our teachers, and then also some for state employees. And we'll move on to some other topics because we have a couple things that we're interested in making sure there's a little piece of the money set aside for some of the initiatives that we believe are also important. And so let's just move on to policy initiatives and in terms of Georgia. And recently we've been announced to be the #1 state in the nation to do business, which was great news, and I know we can get a lot of mileage out of that. Do you feel like our state and the governor and others have contributed to moving us to that status?
Well, I think, it's not so much what my opinion is as much as what the data suggests. And the data really does indicate that Georgia is moving in a positive direction, maybe not as fast as we want to move in terms of the unemployment rate coming down. I think the governor cited in his State of the State that over 200,000 new jobs had been created in the state. And as you mentioned, there have been a number of publications that have ranked Georgia at high levels compared to other states, and we clearly have weathered the storm better than a lot of states. I mean, the governor also cited that we're the only state that still has a AAA bond rating, which is, only a handful of states were able to maintain that rating through the recession. So I think it's things that make us desirable for businesses that are relocating and existing businesses, technology companies and others. We have a fairly low tax rate. We don't overburden businesses with taxes or other regulatory issues. That's very favorable to business. We have a strong workforce. Quick Start, which is a workforce training program within the technical schools, is always cited as one of the best in the nation. And we have a huge and very robust infrastructure system here when you look at Hartsfield-Jackson and our port system, which make us very desirable to businesses. And so combined, all of those things make Georgia a very positive place to do business and a very attractive state to do business in.
One of the challenges that we have is having enough venture funding and investment coming back into the community with so many young companies that we see, early stage and growth stage companies that can't get the funding. I think we've identified over 30 that have in the last couple of years moved out to other states because the funding has brought them there. So as you know, and you were involved with TAG, was one of the leaders in driving this House Bill 318, which we call Invest Georgia, which was passed last year. So yay, the good news is it was passed. The challenge is there isn't any appropriation to that yet. So talk a little bit about that, and where do you think we stand with the state providing some funds for at least the first year of what we're hoping will be probably a 5-year program of funding to get to $100 million.
Well, I haven't heard anything concrete about the funding for Invest Georgia or where that funding would come from in particular. There have been discussions about that a $10 million appropriation potentially being allocated in the first year. And because of the way Georgia's Constitution is written, there are very limited ways in which resources could be allocated to Invest Georgia. So we really are going to have to see what the appetite is on the part of legislators to add that funding in there. In the scheme of things, the $20 billion budget, $10 million doesn't seem like much. It may seem like a lot to those companies that need that investment. I think there is a general consensus amongst legislators that we do need to retain the intellectual capital and the innovation-based businesses that are started and incubated here in Georgia. We invest enormous amounts of resources into our university system, where a lot of these companies are coming from, and we need to find a better way to keep them here. And as you stated, we've seen a number of them get started, maybe get early stage funding, angel funding, and then when that next round of venture capital needs to come in, the venture capitalists say, we want you to move to our city, whether that's Silicon Valley or Austin or Boston. But I would say that there's a general consensus and a growing awareness that something needs to be done to ensure that we are not only retaining the intellectual capital, the businesses, but also those individuals who come from, other countries to be educated here, so that we are able to have some of those, very bright individuals stay here and help grow some of our companies.
And for those listening in, you have the opportunity to be an advocate, and I think our tech community needs to be stronger in terms of advocacy in general. Contact the TAG office, and we'll make sure that you're on the various lists and invite you to High Tech Day at the Capitol and engage you, because it does take people to come down there and make their statements in regard to how important this issue is. Loretta, let's move to another topic around education and technology. There has been a lot of buzz in the last couple years about the haves and the have-nots in terms of schools that don't necessarily have the infrastructure where they can utilize the technology the way that other schools can to advance them and make them more efficient and effective. Do you see any legislation activity around education technology coming down the pike this year?
Well, there are two things, very important and very, very positive signs for the technology industry and for education in general. The governor in his budget appropriated $45 million to ensure wireless connectivity to all schools across the state. That decision came out of a recommendation by a task force that he had formatted earlier, the Digital Learning Task Force, which was made up of public and private sector individuals, and they spent the last year looking at what Georgia needed to do in education and how we needed to go about advancing learning through a digital platform. And so the $45 million allocation in this budget was very, very welcome news. And as you know, that will just provide a tremendous amount of opportunity for the delivery of content. It will help with regard to STEM education. So if every school system across the state, lacks a teacher in a specific discipline, whether it's physics or some type of mathematics, those teachers can be brought in, the best and the brightest can be brought in virtually. So there's exponential potential from that allocation. So that was very favorable. The second thing that I think is very positive for the technology industry that is in the governor's budget is the governor has increased funding through the HOPE grant program for individuals who attend technical colleges pursuing degrees in health information technology or information technology in general. Now, I know you have stated on numerous occasions and talks that you've given about the skills gap and the lack of workforce that we have to meet the needs, particularly in the healthcare IT sector. So this is a real attempt to try to address that skills gap, and individuals who cannot afford to pay for their own technical education will now have the ability to receive funding through the HOPE grant program.
You're right. That's very positive. So we have time for one more question, and I'll just make it a broad question to answer any way you like, but do you foresee any general economic development legislation this year?
I don't see much. The biggest economic development piece this year, again, is in the budget, but it's the governor's commitment to deepening the Savannah port, and that will have reverberations throughout the state. That's a very positive move. So he appropriated $35 million in the next budget, and that will be the sole and final payment from the state. So the state will have contributed all of its share toward deepening that port. And as you know, and the federal government is providing the additional match. But as you know, once the Panama Canal opens, we're going to have bigger ships coming through the canal, and if they're coming through Savannah and into the Savannah port, that's big business for Georgia, and that speaks to the health and vitality of our economy overall.
And Savannah has been the fastest growing port in the nation for a few years, and so hopefully they'll be able to retain that status, particularly when they finish the project to deepen their port. So, Loretta, thanks so much for your leadership at TAG and for your conversation today related to legislation. And maybe we'll check with you later on in the session to see how it's going. So thanks for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.